Some people will tell you to play it safe. We're here to tell you to go all out. Welcome to the All Out Blitz. I am your host, JJ Wenner, and I am joined by my astute co-host, Doug Orth. How are you doing, Doug?
Well, I moved to astute. That means I made a good impression over these first two episodes. Awesome. I am doing well, thank you. How about yourself?
It's been an up and down day, but it always is great to end with a conversation with my buddy, Doug.
Amen.
Well, tonight on the pod, we're going to be talking about rookie draft strategies. How do we prepare for the drafts and figure out how to make our own draft boards like the pros? But before we do, Doug, Jared Goff signed a 4-year, $212 million extension with $170 million guaranteed. Now, we know this is a good deal for Goff, but is it a good deal for the Lions, Doug?
Okay, so I'm torn. I do not have a high opinion of Goff. That does not mean it's not a good deal for the Lions, because we saw last year essentially what they can do. They have such a good supporting cast now that Goff doesn't have to carry that team. Not that he was carrying it before, but when the quarterback's job is to basically go in any of 3 or 4 great directions, David Montgomery, Jahmyr Gibbs, Sam Laporta, Amon-Ra St. Brown, you just let your guys cook. You don't let the quarterback cook. You let your receivers and your pass catchers and your running backs cook. And so, from the perspective, it's good for the Lions because they get continuity, with what was already a very good offense. So, from that perspective, great. Could they improve at the quarterback position? Absolutely.
Now, do you think that coupled with their record-setting deals for like Penei Sewell, St. Brown, right? They both signed high contracts. Do you think they have enough flexibility to keep the train rolling? I mean, is this in Brad we trust? Brad Holmes is doing a great job.
You know, Brad Holmes come from the Rams, right? And I wonder if he's almost building the same salary cap hell that the Rams went through here a couple years ago. I almost wonder if the Lions are headed in that direction. I mean, when you have 3 guys making top of the line deals, I know it's going to be a while before Gibbs has to worry about, or they have to worry about extending Gibbs,
or Hutchinson,
or Hutchinson. But you're going to get to a point here pretty soon where you're going to have to start trading some of your starters, just because the salary cap is going up. It seems almost like 10% every year, and I don't know that we can continue to expect that kind of growth in the cap. I suppose as long as that happens, then you can continue to fit one more star in your under your cap. So, but yeah, I think we're good for the next 2 or 3 years, and then I think we're going to be talking about the Lions in 2026, 2027. Oh, what the hell? What just happened here, right? So I think that's where we're headed. But again,
yeah, the Dolphins went through a little bit of that this past offseason, having to sort of readjust, right? They had spent. Then they needed to take a step back, reassess, and now move forward again. They seem to do it seamlessly. I think if anybody can, Brad Holmes might have that flexibility and the ability, to make those moves.
And I'll say one other thing, JJ.
Mm-hmm.
The way they're drafting, I mean, you asked, are they hamstringing themselves? Yeah, potentially in 2 to 3 years, but that's not their problem right now. And with the way that Holmes and company are drafting, you can probably do those trades that I just discussed here a few seconds ago, and you're just restocking the shelves. So yes, they're hamstringing themselves, but I think they're good enough at talent valuation that they can probably get out of it.
Well, if you want to prepare for drafts, what better way than with our comprehensive 2024 IDP Plus rookie guide is here and available now. Get the rookie draft guide for a limited time only for $9.99. The latest version includes all post-draft feedback that you need to dominate your league. So check out the link in the show description and download your copy today. All right, Doug. Now, I am not a professional, but I consider myself to be a good fantasy manager. I win more than I lose. But I have noticed that if I lose focus, I can have bad stretches, right? During the past 2 years, I wasn't making content, focusing more on my day job, and I could see my win percentage drop. Now, for you, it's a little bit different. You play for real money. You can't have a bad year. So I want to be more like you. I want to learn from you, which is the entire reason we did this podcast, right? I want to learn from you. So this is going to be our first how-to episode. Now, I was workshopping a title, Teach Me How with Dougie, right? Teach me how. Don't let my kids see this. We shouldn't be dancing. We have to hire and bring in some talent. But I want you to teach me how, Dougie. So let's start at the very beginning with getting ready for a draft, and that's rankings. Now, as somebody who doesn't do my own scouting, I generally don't start from scratch. I have a few trusted sources, and I will use those as my starting spot. I download a bunch, put them in a Google spreadsheet, do some formulas, and I come up with my process. When you are building your rankings, where do you start?
Well, I've been writing my own draft profiles for over 10 years. Several years ago, and after getting burned by the likes of Josh Rosen and Clyde Edwards-Helaire for different reasons, I came to the realization that I probably watch as much of the rookie class as anyone and understand their strengths and the weaknesses, how their strengths and weaknesses translate to the fantasy game better than most. About 2 or 3 years ago is when I determined I needed to have a process in place to rank players before the draft. And we'll dive into that process a bit more in a few minutes. I think it's extremely helpful to lay the groundwork of what I think of a player before the draft so that I will not be less influenced by things such as landing spot or draft capital, which is a term I despise among those in the fantasy community, but that's another story for another time. By taking into account main factors such as decision-making and the ability to read through a progression at quarterback or contact balance and elusiveness at running back is how I establish a film grade on players, which is technically where I start when it comes to ranking the rookie class or fantasy. Now, once the draft is over, I will adjust players slightly in my rankings based on team fit, although fit is unlikely to bump a player up or down very far. As a whole, I believe talent wins out over temporary things such as fit or scheme. That is, unless it is reasonable to conclude that there is little reason to believe either one of those things, fit or scheme, will change anytime soon based on how unlikely there will be a change in leadership, such as Andy Reid in Kansas City or Mike Tomlin in Pittsburgh.
So, all right. So that's where you start. You start before the draft. You start grading your players and you get them into a ranking system.
Correct.
After the draft happens, do you keep them the same or do you tweak them at all?
Again, yeah, I'll adjust based slightly on team fit. So, I was one who already liked Lad McConkey, for example, but now you pair him with Justin Herbert. Okay. People are going to look at the Chargers offense now. I don't want any part of that Chargers offense because it's going to be run based. Well, even the most run heavy teams pass 400 times. Tell me where the 400 targets on that offense are going to go right now. I think even McConkey is going to have to either struggle with injuries or struggle picking up the offense not to get to 100 targets. He's going to be able to do work on 100 targets. So I'm not projecting. I'm just trying to give an example here. So, but again, I'll move. I think players can move up or down a tier based on fit, but the way the NFL changes from year to year, I think we're kidding ourselves if we don't base it on talent and move from there.
Okay, so you are solely based on talent. A little bit of influence here and there, maybe a skosh up or down, but for the most part, your pre-draft rankings, like that's where you get an idea of whether or not they can make it.
Yeah, I'll give you one exception though, and most people in dynasty leagues will say, "Oh, I've got a championship team. I'm one piece away." Mm-hmm. Well, the easiest way to not be successful in dynasty, the easiest is to to not being able to have an honest, be able to honestly assess your team, right? And so if you are truly one player away, then go for need. I'm all for that. Go for the gusto, man, right? Go for the gusto. But if you can honestly look at your team and I'll tell you one example. I know a guy in one of my leagues has Josh Allen and Justin Herbert, for example, but the rest of his roster is, I'll say blah. Okay. He's not the one that needs to be thinking to himself, if I just invest in Jonathan Brooks, I'm gold, because he's not there. But he needs to be able to look at his roster and think that. So now if I have a team where I'm 2 stud running backs, 2 good quarterbacks, 3 receivers, and I just think I need that 4th receiver to get me through those bye weeks and maybe become a wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 in future years, then that's when I need to go for need. But and we'll talk about a situation here, I'm sure shortly, where I am particularly deep at a position and I'm going to invest in that position anyway. So
okay. So I think I pretty much understand where you're coming from. So once you now have your rankings, right? You have them on your spreadsheet. Now that's normally when I tweak them based upon others' observations and opinions, because I don't do my own scouting. So if I have a trusted wide receiver source like Matt Harmon, right, reception perception,
yep.
I'll bump players around. There's guys I trust. I trust you. I trust like Matt Waldman, like different guys who I know their process. I trust their process, and I'll read that, and I will make changes based upon that. However, at this point, my rankings are all positional based. So they're not integrated.
Gotcha.
So once I start to feel a little bit more comfortable, that's when I start breaking into tiers. Is that something you do? Are you a tier guy?
I start with tiers to get me so I can get to the integration process. So yes, I am a tier guy, but now there'll be those in the fantasy community that'll tell you that they don't integrate at all, that they just basically work off what NFL clubs would call the horizontal board. Whereas, so you're just, instead of vertical board, say like a top 200 board, you're just working off top 20 quarterbacks, top 40 running backs, top 60 receivers, and then you just cross them off, and then, oh, okay, the first 4 receivers are gone, I've got number 5. If that works for you, great. I need to know where I value each of these guys. Basically, I need to be able to compare apples to oranges, which is what my big board process is all about. Is I don't want to go into a draft thinking, well, I need this position. No, I need the best player is what I need. And if I'm right about that best player, then his value as the season moves on is going to supersede any need that I had back in May, July, early September.
So when you're coming up with your tiers, then they're integrated. So you'll have the best quarterbacks with the best wide receivers.
Eventually, well, yeah. When I get to the end, so like what I did for FF today here, the week after the draft, was I had the top 60 for one quarterback and the top 60 for Superflex. Now within that, I'm building up the positional ranks first, so I can then I can move guys across, up and down based on that. But what I don't want to get stuck, especially when I'm doing a live draft, and I know the dynasty drafts I do none of them are live drafts. But if we're talking like a redraft, for example, I don't want to get stuck in. I've already got enough on my mind when I'm on the clock. I don't want to then think, see, if 7 out of 10 times I take Josh Allen here, but man, I'm really feeling Keenan Allen. Well, no, I want to know that I have Josh Allen 10 spots higher than I did Keenan Allen, for example. And so I want the value, and we'll talk about potential trade value and what a guy's actually worth. We'll talk about that later as well. But that's kind of where I'm at with that.
So then, what is your determination for tier breaks?
Yeah, we talked about it a little bit. Talent outweighs about every other potential tiebreaker by a large margin, in my estimation. As I mentioned before, team and fit, which includes the quarterback and scheme, is a consideration. Don't get me wrong about that. Measurables tend to get mixed in with the talent, and then for the most part, I don't care about college production. I suppose if there's an extreme example in one way or the other, then I'll look into why. But there's usually a pretty good explanation as to why. Last year, Lad McConkey had 30 catches. Okay, what was the reason? Well, he missed 5 games. That was part of it. Georgia doesn't run the ball a hell of a lot. So, I mean, there are things that if you look deep enough, you can usually find the reason as to why the production wasn't there. Conversely, if you have a, I'm taking this back a few years, Zay Jones with East Carolina. It's great that he had 130 catches. It's great that he broke the NCAA record in receptions. Well, how was he getting those receptions? He's turned in to be a fine pro, but he's not. He caught almost 400 balls in college. That wasn't going to translate because so many of those balls were manufactured touches for him, right? So anyway, that's a long explanation as far as college production is concerned, but I don't generally care about that all that much. What I think of these guys talent wise is where I start, and then everything else is kind of I don't know about a check mark, but kind of more of it's in the back of my mind. I'll leave it at that. I'll say that it's kind of in the back of my mind.
So, how much do you allow a narrative to change your film grade? Like you said with McConkey, right? Somebody maybe didn't play enough games, didn't really have as much film on. So how much will you let the narrative that he suffered injuries, but if it wasn't for injuries, he would have done this?
I despise narratives.
Okay.
That doesn't mean that they don't come into play. A narrative can be close to correct, but I think a narrative. I'm going to interrupt myself here. One of my biggest problems with the industry is, and this probably is more of a human thing than it is a fantasy manager thing. People want simple explanations. They want if A, then B, or draw me a straight line from A to B. So you're telling me let's fire the coach, and 3-6 before, and the new coach comes in 4-1. Must have been the coach. Well, yeah, but right. Sometimes it is that. Most of the time it's A, B, C, and D. Maybe some of the decisions that the coach made, but it's not just because the new coach came in to change things. Some of the changes he made may have contributed to that 4-1 stretch, right? Let's take the Raiders, for example, last year. They were just happy to get Josh McDaniels out of there. Right. So, of course, if you're feeling free and easy, man, I love that Antonio Pierce guy. I'm gonna run through a wall for that guy. Well, shockingly, you're going to play better too, right? So, anyway, so I try to, just like with anything else, I try to give credence, even I don't know if I haven't said this very often, but even the most stupid person can give good advice, but you have to, right? You question the source, but you're like, that's not that checks out. That checks out. Well, just because they're typically offering stupid advice doesn't mean that they can't have one good nugget for you. So you're trying to sift through what is possible, what is rational, what is logical, and then move from there.
All right, Doug. Well, let me just say, if you do want something logical, sorry, I'm working on my segue here.
You're the master of the segue.
Oh, Lord, not this time. If you're looking for something logical, what's more logical come this time of the year? It's draft season, folks. And what is better than a live draft? I was lucky enough to get into Scott Fishbowl. Thank you, Scott. I'm so happy. And I got to sign up for a live draft. I haven't done a live draft in years, and I'm excited. So get ahead of your game now with the Trophy Smacks gorgeous draft boards, complete with player stickers so deep, I can't say that line, Ice Cube. Sorry, buddy, but today was a good day. So deep you couldn't possibly need them all. And for the first time, and this is exciting news, Trophy Smack has an IDP expansion pack for all of us defensive nerds. No more scribbling names on blank stickers. Go to Trophy Smack and get the only draft board that meets all of your needs. So check out the link in the show notes and get yours today.
But JJ, I want to scribble.
Well, you can always scribble. You are allowed to scribble, Doug. I will never stop you.
I'll tell you what. I want to speak on behalf. I know this isn't part of what we do. Matt Walsh is the guy that runs Trophy Smack. I don't know if you know Matt. Awesome dude. I DM'd him because it's been a while since I reached out to him. I DM'd him here in the last couple of weeks. Just an awesome dude. Guy's got a ton of energy. If nothing else, just go through him just to get a jolt of energy, man. But I have nothing but good things to say about Trophy Smack. They have you see the belt behind me. That's where it came from, Trophy Smack. So
yes, our friend Kelly works over there and does a great job. We love Kelly. So Trophy Smack, IDP expansion pack, get them today. That was like a little ad lib there. I like that, Doug. All right. So now that our rankings and tiers are complete, right? We've done this work. They're now your rankings, right? Now they're yours. If you're doing it the way I did, now I own them. And I have them all matched up with my player valuations, my player takes. But when you approach a specific draft, and we kind of talked about this a little bit before, but I want to dive in a little deeper. Are you team need agnostic and simply go best player available? Or are you looking at those holes like you mentioned earlier and saying, like, are you telling yourself the narrative about your team?
Yeah, I think you get in trouble if you try to create a narrative for your own team. The best way to go about it is to be honest with yourself. The same team I was referencing earlier, I believe no, I wasn't. I didn't reference that one earlier. I was referencing it in my own head. That's what I was doing. So I looked at it honestly. I took an honest look at my team, and I started off the offseason with Terry McLaurin as my wide receiver 3, which wasn't bad, right? I had Devontae Adams, Cooper Kupp, Terry McLaurin. Those were my 3 receivers. Had I made a smart lineup decision in Week 16 last year, I would have rode that team to a title, but instead I did not. So I finished 3rd. Anyway, that wide receiver has been my biggest bugaboo in that league for a while now. So knowing that I wasn't going to be able to acquire cheap young receivers, I'm like, okay, I've got a 2-year window here at least. So I went pretty much all in this offseason. I had some good fortune come my way, but that team now has Devontae Adams, Stephon Diggs, Keenan Allen, Calvin Ridley, and Cooper Kupp. I've got those 5 receivers, all 29 or older, but I think between the 5 of them, I can piece together 3 good starters every week. Meanwhile, and I'm going to get around to answering your question here in a second, but I'm trying to lay a groundwork here. With some good luck, though, I was offered some draft picks along the way too to make some of those deals happen, and now I've got 2 first-rounders, a 2nd and a 3rd. Even though I didn't really feel like I gave up that much, but now I've got a 2-year window with Christian McCaffrey, the Cleveland running backs, and those 5 receivers. And then I can restock next year with those 2 first-rounders and maybe even that 2nd rounder. And that's another thing I love about this is people sometimes will say, "Yep, I'm in my year 3 of my rebuild." JJ, I've been playing Dynasty for 10 years. I've never rebuilt. Why am I rebuilding? I should be rebuilding as I'm competing for championships. Right. It should be, I play in 22-man roster, 22, 23-man rosters. Those 10 or 12-year players should be win now players. And then you should be consistently churning that, the last 8 or 10 players and focus on youth. And so they're the next, you're a teacher, you graduate one class and you bring the next one up. It doesn't hurt to think of it like that. Anyway, sorry about rambling there. I'm going to ramble for a little bit more. Bear with me. You asked about team needs or best player available. To me, that's kind of a loaded question, but I consider myself a best player available drafter. Within that, however, I'm trying to do what is best for the long term, obviously. It has become abundantly clear over the last 5 or 10 years that receivers hold their value and remain relevant much longer than running backs. So I lean receiver early now. Now, if it helps our viewers, I try to think of drafting rookies in terms of the trade value they will immediately have and what their trade value upside might be in 2 to 3 years. Case in point, and this is an example I was talking about, one of the 2 or 3 things I said I was going to talk about later. Case in point, I'm in one league where I'm drafting at the 103 in July. I'm at least 5 deep with good, if not elite receivers, but my biggest question mark is probably the quarterback. Have Deshaun Watson, Will Levis, and Russell Wilson. Tight end could also be considered a concern, but I believe Kyle Pitts is about to party like it's 2021 again with Kirk Cousins at quarterback. So at any rate, I wrestled with passing on Rome Odunze before the NFL draft because I don't need him, and probably won't need him anytime soon. So I strongly considered. I'm talking in the past tense here because this is what I was thinking when I was thinking about what I was going to do with that pick back in March. So I'm talking in the past tense here. The draft has not happened. I strongly considered taking Brock Bowers or Caleb Williams at 103 because they could be the missing piece to my championship run. Problem with that is I'm not maximizing the value of my draft pick if I do that. I think it would be similar to putting all of my investments into a money market account because I was afraid to take the higher risk that might come with an income stock. Odunze's stock figures to start very high and only get higher over the next year or two. There's a distinct possibility I can trade him for the quarterback and tight end I may or may not need down the road if I deem it necessary. And if Odunze is as good as I and many others think he is, then I should be in a great position at receiver with him, Garrett Wilson, Nico Collins, Brandon Ayuk, and Zay Flowers over the next 4 to 5 years.
Okay. I don't know if that answered my question completely. So
Sure.
So I was just in a super flex rookie draft. My quarterbacks aren't very good. I have CJ Stroud and not much else behind him. I think Russell Wilson is one of the guys I have behind him. I came up at 105 with JJ McCarthy still on the board. It's, like I said, a super flex draft. But I went with Penix was there too.
Okay.
But I went with Neighbors because I thought Neighbors was the better value. Now, I needed a wide receiver. Yeah, everybody can always use a wide receiver, right?
Right.
But did I misdraft? Should I have been investing more to bolster the super flex position since that has more positional value?
Super flex changes things, but I would then ask you, on a scale of 1 to 10, what do you think the chances of JJ McCarthy being 80% of Kirk Cousins is?
I'm not a big JJ McCarthy guy.
Because at the end of the day, what we want are players that, well, I'm sorry to make it sound so simplistic. We want good players. Do we think that Malik Neighbors is going to be a good player?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. JJ McCarthy, if he comes close to Kirk Cousins, then he'll be good for Superflex. If he is the guy that I saw in the last 4 games of his college career, then he'd be a very good QB2. Is there bust potential with him? I think so. So what we don't want is to come into the draft every year at the 102, 103, 104. Well, I need quarterback because I made a mistake 2 years ago. I made a mistake 4 years ago. If Neighbors is who we think he is, then you're going to be able to get that trade for a 28, 29-year-old quarterback in 2 years if you need to. So even in Superflex, if Neighbors is really, I high-end comped him to CD Lamb. If he's anything close to CD Lamb, you're going to get a stud quarterback in return if you still need a quarterback at that point.
Okay, so we kind of started down this path, so we might as well finish it. So, but the major scoring differences, right? In
Sure.
format, super flex, 1 QB, major difference. Outside of like the major one, tight end premium is obviously going to change your draft board.
Mhm.
Do you look at the minutia of scoring, like 0.5 to 1 PPR,
Yeah,
0.25 a point per carry, or little things like that? Does that really change your rankings?
I think I can answer this one fairly quickly. In so much as it relates to the overall setup, I only play in PPR, non-superflex leagues, and with the same provider, so I have a good handle on the overall scoring setup. Even if I was to stray away from my provider or play in superflex, tight end premium leagues, I would only factor in the scoring heavily if the format was dramatically different than what I'm used to. But I would. Uh, for example, and I'm going to say, so I'm used to like 1 point per 20 yards passing, or 1 point per 25 yards passing. I know some of the Yahoo. I think Yahoo's standard format is 50 yards passing, 1 point per 50 yards passing. If I'm in a league like that, then dual threat quarterbacks are going up considerably. But to answer your question, if the only time I'm going to consider scoring in terms of dynasty rankings, rookie rankings, dynasty rankings, is if it's PPR versus non-PPR, or just like you mentioned, superflex versus tight end premium. If it's those things, then especially the tight end premium, then your tight ends are going way up on your what you call your vertical board. So it would change, but the still, and some of the team building mechanics, team building philosophies would change too. But basically every league that I play in, doesn't matter if it's Scott Fish, doesn't matter if it's my high stakes redraft leagues, it's getting to a point where you better be strong at receiver. So I want a good core of receivers at the very least. But I look at scoring, but only minimally, unless again superflex, tight end premium type of stuff.
All right. So last week after the show, we were hanging out with some of our dear friends, and you mentioned the differences in leagues based upon the buy-in. Now, I'm not going to divulge any industry secrets, but before you complete a rookie draft, do you consider what the buy-in is to base your strategy?
As it relates to how much money I'm investing in the league?
Into how the amount of money, how much money other people invest in the league might change their strategy.
Oh, yeah. So, okay, it doesn't really affect me, and I'll get to that in a second. I'm going to say the majority of fantasy managers tend to subscribe to groupthink, even if they tell themselves that they aren't. So, in my estimation, winning high stakes leagues isn't as hard as it might seem on the outside. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying it comes without risk, because that's not true. But I stopped thinking about my buy-in as soon as I pay the entry fee. That money's already been spent. It's my job at that point to make sure the money was well spent. So from that perspective, I'm applying what I've learned and what I know to that team, regardless if it's a free dynasty league or if it's a $500 buy-in.
So you don't change your approach. Do you think others change their approaches?
Yeah, that's what I was saying before. I think it's hard, especially with social media now, to not subscribe to groupthink. I think the overwhelming majority, and I'll be happy for some high stakes people to tell me I'm wrong. I think the overwhelming majority of people play not to lose and not as opposed to win.
You find like the riskiness decreases, right? They become more risk averse, I guess.
I think they make moves. I think they're particularly sensitive to. I like how things are going. I don't want to. If I've got an 8 on a scale of 1 to 10, if I have an 8 for a team, I don't want to make a move to potentially get myself to a 9 because things are going well as an 8, right? And sometimes you need that. And I'm not saying that a risk doesn't take your team from an 8 to a 6. but sometimes it's that I don't care what Twitter says. I don't care what people are telling me. I believe in that player. I believe in that situation. And sometimes I can't tell you how often just going with what I know, what I feel like I know to be true or potentially be true has won me a league, because it happens frequently. So yeah. So I find high stakes, especially as you move up the ladder. So, and I'm talking redraft now. I've had buy-ins of 1,500, and those guys, they'll trade with you. They'll trade, but they want to know they're winning the trade, or at least they want to know they're winning the trade immediately. And so, yeah, it's hard to get trades done in those leagues, because if I'm sitting at 8-2, 7-3 after 10 weeks, well, I have no reason to believe that my team's going to go down the toilet, because, well, I'm batting 700 or 800. But sometimes it's that you need that one more push. Maybe you've been riding the coattails of Christian McCaffrey all year, and when it gets to week 15, 16, and 17, you're going to need that stud receiver to everybody else is going to have their 80% Christian McCaffrey, and they're going to have a receiver, and you don't. You need to be able to match that.
Interesting. So, looking back on the topics we've covered today,
Sure.
You base your ranks off of your scouting pre-draft. You don't allow the draft to change you too much. Landing spot, fit, whatever. You're not really adjusting anything too greatly based upon the talent you initially said. You don't let narratives get involved. You try to keep the narratives out of the conversation. But you also have to honestly assess your team as it is right now.
Correct.
All right. So then you split into tiers. You make sure that they're all integrated. You use a vertical board so you know what best player is in your estimation. And then you really don't take small changes in scoring setup into account, just major positional things like Superflex 1 QB or tight end premium.
Yeah, if it's just making stuff up here, 1 point per 10 yards rushing versus 1 point per 15 yards rushing. No, I suppose a player can move up one spot, 1 or 2 spots, because that's going to favor more of your touchdown scorers, right? If you give fewer points for yards gained, then it's going to be touchdown scoring is going to be more important. So, yeah, but you're not going to. At least not me. I'm not going to adjust my ranks too much based on those minute changes. But PPR versus non-PPR, tight end premium, super flex, because those are huge. Those are huge considerations.
Okay. I think you gave me a lot of good information. I'm sorry. This isn't about me. I think you gave the listeners a lot of good information. I have to process a lot of this before we come back next week and chat.
Jay,
yeah.
I'm sorry, Jay. I'll say one other thing. I told you to have an honest assessment of your team. I think it's almost as important, if not more important, to have an honest assessment of the 11 other teams in your league too. Be able to look through their rosters. And I say this, do this for trade purposes, but I also say at the start of the season, okay, how do I stack up against this guy? How do I stack up against this guy? If you can honestly assess the 12 teams in your league, I play in 12 teamers, so I'm just assuming here. But if I can look at my team versus the other 11 teams in the league and say, yep, I think this is the top 3 team. Okay, then I need to make moves for a championship run this year. If I can look at my team and say I might push for the playoffs, okay, then that shouldn't be news to anybody that's watching here. But I'm saying it's just as important to assess the teams in your league as it is to assess your own team.
That's fair. And be honest while you're doing it. Don't let your hatred of another manager or your rivalry right? Taint what you're looking at. As so many, it's always funny, like when you post a player take on Twitter and somebody attacks you for that take, you can often find that team's information in their Twitter bio, right? Like, because they don't want to hear negative stuff about their own team. So, okay, I'm going to add that to my list of things to consider.
Things to consider.
Oh, all right, Doug. Well, listen, we're not just pretty faces here at IDP Plus. We have an entire suite of tools and rankings for both offense and defense. We have rookie rankings, injury trackers, snap kit tools, premium articles, more. But right now, we are offering get your first month for just $1 with the promo code Mock Draft. So head over to idpguys.org after the show to get ahead of your lazy league mates and start your march towards fantasy football greatness today with the promo code Mock Draft. The link and details are in the show description. Doug, it is time to say goodbye for this episode. Oof. Can you tell the good people where they can find you and what you're working on?
As always, my stuff is at FF Today. I'm not cooking anything right now except for in about 20 minutes. I'm probably going to be working on maybe some crab cakes, and I don't know. I don't know what I'm going to be cooking for supper, but not cooking anything that's going to be displayed to the audience for 2 or 3 weeks yet. But I can tell you my first article that's going to drop with FF Today is going to be offensive line analysis, and that will probably be in mid-June. But between now and then, I'm just working on getting ahead. I can also tell you one other thing. I will be. I'm sure. I hope most of our audience knows who Greg Kellogg is, the Hall of Famer, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'll be working on a project with him, and I don't know when I'm going to start that, but that'll be. He wants to do a 5-year study on basically draw some strong conclusions on whether zero receiver or zero running back is a legitimate strategy. And so we're going to take a 5-year study, and we're going to have 5 different writers cover each year over the last 5 years and dissect it and see what we come up with.
Interesting topic. I know that's going to be hotly debated on the Twitter machine. I'm at JJ Wenner on Twitter, right over there. You can catch me on the Rider Dynasty podcast this Friday with Jameson and Joe as we conduct a 2-round rookie mock with our friends Matt Donnelly, Nate Polvote, Dave Heilman, and Johnny's coming on. So a special thank you to the whole crew at IDP Plus for helping produce the pod. Special thanks to Doug for all of his insight. Be sure to tune in next week when Doug and I break down Dynasty startup strategies. And thank you for tuning in. And remember, when in doubt, go all out. Have a good night. Boat drinks, my friends.